Alright guys, let's get started. This is week 20, which is Industrial Revolution in Americas. It is a long week. Your focuses are 2 pages front and back, I know, but it is a very important section because this is the foundation of everything else. Industrialization is going to change the power from the east to the west. It is going to make Europe the most dominant, one of the most dominant places in the world because of the economic as well as social changes that are going to occur. So let's get started. Now, an overview of the Industrial Revolution. It's all based on energy, which is coal and steam, is going to replace wind and water and human and animal labor. We're also going to see that factories are going to begin popping up. Rural agriculture is going to be decline. Manufacturing is going to increase, and transportation is going to dramatically increase because we need raw materials when we need them, where we need them. So we're going to have a creation of a new social class. This is going to be our urban population, our industrial middle class. It is going to form new political systems, new economies. All of these are going to be based around the idea of Marxism to a degree, and we're going to see how they're going to shape the world. Now, what we are going to see, this is going to have a negative effect on our environment when you're depleting major resources like coal, other resources like oil and gasoline from our environment. It's going to have a negative consequences, of course, which we have a better understanding than they did of as well, and we're going to have a lot of social problems just because the world is changing so fast. The laws and governmental regulations are having a time to struggling to keep up. Now, the Industrial Revolution is going to begin in England in the 1780s. It is going to come after a second agricultural revolution, which is going to have an increased food surplus. People are going to have a disposable income, and the market population is going to increase and labor supply. Now, the reason why it's going to start in England is because it has coal and iron ore. There's also a lot of easy transportation in rivers and canal system that makes it easy to move raw materials as well as manufactured materials, as well as exporting to imperial colonies, which are guaranteed marketplaces because remember, they are forcing people to buy the goods they want. Now we're going to have a lot of technology, the flying shuttle, which is going to increase textiles. All of these are textile based. We're going to have the mule and the power loom. All of these are going to improve textiles or cloth. Now, one of the most important inventions is going to be steam power, which is going to be created by James Watt. He believes that this is the future, and it turns out he's completely correct. It's about firing coal, heating up water, and the steam, which is a reusable resource to a degree, is going to be turning all the turbines. This is going to make a lot of factories a lot more reliable and independent. However, it is going to force all of these factories to be near water, rivers specifically, which is going to limit where factories can be built. And we're also going to see iron and steel is going to become a huge business, as well as soon as the Bessemer converter is going to be created by William Kelly and Henry Bessemer. They are going to take, which was a very hard and challenging process of making steel, and make it into a much faster and cheaper, which is going to be brought here to the United States by Andrew Carnegie, which will turn Pittsburgh into Steel City. Now, transportation is also going to be improved upon because there's now steel that can be used. We're going to have railroads for the first time. Now, railroads are going to be steam powered. The rocket is going to be the fastest train, which is going to reach 28 miles an hour, which is very, very fast. We're also going to have steamships for the first time. Steamers is what they were commonly referred to, and this is going to really begin. Keep in mind that the Titanic is going to, all of that is the glamorous steamship era is going to be in less than 100 years from the invention of it. So it's pretty impressive. Now, dense transportation networks are going to develop, and these are going to be intercontinental. We're going to have international and global market that's going to exist because of it. And we're going to have these types of transportation are going to encourage industrialization. Now, the growth of factories is going to occur because of massive machinery. machinery, supply and labor. The transportation of raw materials to where the manufacturing sites are is a huge component because we have materials like iron ore, coal, cotton bales, all of these things that need to be brought to the location in which the manufacturing is going to be done. That needs to be done by train because it's easier, faster. We're also going to have a factory system, which is individuals are working at home, is going to fail, and we're going to see that they're going to be brought together in one certain place. Urbanization, which is the movement of people into these cities, is going to guarantee a supply of cheap and unskilled labor, which means they're going to have the choice of who will work for them and who will not, which is good for business, bad for the employees. Now, the working conditions in these factories are very, very rough and very, very challenging. Keep in mind that the world is changing much faster than government regulation can keep up. So there's going to be a dramatic shift from rural working to industrial working. These factory workers are working from 6 days a week, 14 hours a day, of course, having Sunday off. It's a day of holy rest. Immediate supervision and punishments are going to be used in order to keep people in order. We're going to see that there's going to be protests, which will eventually be put down. All of these types of things are going to start occurring. It's not until about the early 1900s we really see great reforms in this area. Now, the spread of industrialization is going to start in England, of course, but there is going to be a gentleman who is going to sneak out plans for a factory out of England, bring them to the United States, and once the plans are out of England and in the United States, it just explodes, and industrialization is going to be focused in England, U.S., Germany, France, and Belgium. Now, some of the major players and roles in industrialization is going to be the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. This is going to lay the foundation for industrialization because it's going to abolish interregional trade and it's going to dismantle all the guilds. So all of a sudden, all the countries are a lot more open up to trading, as well as countries like Germany, specifically Bismarck, are trying to get more people into industrialization and opening up factories. Now, when we see industrialization here in North America, it's going to start in the 1820s in New England specifically, and it's going to be based around the cotton textile industry. In the 1870s, heavy iron and steel industries are going to emerge in Pennsylvania and Alabama specifically. We're going to see it in Pittsburgh. By the 1900s, the U.S. is an economic powerhouse because of all the natural resources we have here in the United States. England is a very small island with dense coal and iron ore deposits. However, the United States is an expansive piece of land in comparison and has a ton of natural resources as well. Railroad construction is also going to start taking off. Now, the mass production of two types of things is going to lead to a dramatic increase in the production of goods. Eli Whitney and his cotton gin are going to increase the output of cotton. With that, cotton becomes cheaper, which means it becomes more of a desired good. With that becoming a more desired good, the demand is going to go up significantly. We're also seeing that machines are using interchangeable parts, which means fixing machines is going to be cheaper and more affordable. We're also going to see that mass production is going to be the hallmark or the foundation of everything, which means people are trying to make as much as they possibly can of an item in order to keep the price low. With prices low, more people are going to buy, and that keeps the profits up. Now, Henry Ford is going to be a massive player in all of this. He creates the assembly line, which is going to increase the output of cars significantly. Typically, before Henry Ford, it would take about 3 to 6 weeks to build one car by hand. Because of the assembly line, which he created and invented, he can make a car in 93 minutes. That is going to drop the price of owning your own car significantly, which means more Americans can own them, and hence why, the American dream is to own your own car. Now, big business is going to start setting up. Now, large factories require lots of capital. Capital in this regard means money. It takes a lot of money to open up a business, especially a factory. So what we see being created is called corporations. People would put money into these corporations, and in return, they would get stock. This stock, every quarter, they would get a payment of their return back as well as profits. In Britain and France, they're going to lay the foundations for the modern corporations, which will later dictate the 20th and the 21st century. Our entire world is full of corporations here in 2015, and this is the beginning of the foundation of them. Now we're starting to see during industrialization the foundation for things like monopolies, Standard Oil, with Rockefeller. We're going to see that a bunch of other major companies are going to start creating monopolies. These are large corporations who form blocks to drive out competition, keeping prices high, which means they control everything, so they dictate the price. Now, John D. Rockefeller controls almost all the oil drilling, processing, and refining markets in the U.S. The German firm IG Farben controls 90% of the chemical production. This means they control the price, they control how much it rises, they control how much it falls. We're going to see that governments are going to eventually outlaw them. However, they are going to reign supreme for quite some time until the laws catch up with these new sets of problems. Now, things are going to be changing here in this industrialized world. Technology is going to improve significantly. We're going to have a lot more cheap manufactured goods, especially textiles or cloth, and travel and transportation are shifting significantly. With all these shifts, we're also going to see a massive shift in population. Population is going to skyrocket both in Europe and in the Americas. Now, there's reasons why. Now, although industrialization results in marked decline of both fertility and mortality, there's going to be the reason for a decline in mortality is because there's better diets. There's improved disease control. We're going to see vaccines starting to be done. There's a really interesting picture in your textbook about it. And declining fertility because of all the toxins in the air as well as the living conditions. We're going to see that fertility is going to go down. However, because there's so many more people in the world producing 1, 2, 3 kids, we're going to see the population is still going to rise. Another unique thing that's going to start occurring is contraception. Now, keep in mind, the Industrial Revolution is going to bring into the world for the first time women in the workplace. Women are delaying having a family, having kids, in order to continue making money in the factories. Now, one of the big demands of these new independent women who have money is contraception. Ancient and medieval methods are still going to be used. However, we're going to see that Thomas Malthus predicts an overpopulation crisis, and he says no one should be reproducing because we have a moral restraint, because we don't want the world to be too populated, then everyone gets wiped out. We're also going to see the invention of the condom, which has an ancient and medieval method. However, it's going to be the first time it is going to be made from latex, which is going to improve its ability to work. Now, the urban environment, urbanization is going to proceed dramatically from 1800 to 1900. Almost from 20% of the population to 75% of the population are going to be living in cities. The reason people are living in cities is because of jobs, because of an opportunity to change your life. We're also going to have much more intensified industrial pollution. For instance, in London, not only could you not see the sun because of its rainy dreariness, you couldn't even see the gray clouds. All you could see were the black clouds. City centers become overcrowded and unsanitary. Like we keep coming back to, the governments have not been able to regulate this because the world is changing so fast. We will see that they do catch up and they start regulating all of this. Now, there's going to be a massive migration. A lot of people are going to be leaving Europe and heading to the United States. Now, over 50 million are going to cross the Atlantic. If any of your ancestors are immigrants to the United States, typically they're going to be coming around at this point. We have, of course, migrations. We're a country built on immigrants, but most immigrants are going to be coming over at this time after the Industrial Revolution because there's so much more opportunity to find work. Now, Britons are trying to leave in order to avoid the slums. Potato famine is going on in Ireland, and the Jews are being persecuted in Russia, so the United States is a destination by most of the immigrants. Now, these new social classes that are going to arrive because of industrialization are going to result in a decline of slavery. Now, they are going to be pushing for abolitionism and all of these components. Capitalist wealth brings new status to non-aristocratic families, which means people who have a good product, Carnegie, Rockefeller, all of these self-made men are going to rise in the social classes of America and even the world. Now, new urban classes of professionals are going to start showing up. We have the terminology for the first time, the blue-collar factory workers, as well as the urban environment creates new types of diversions. Sporting events become a big thing, and we're going to see baseball and a lot of other sports that we enjoy watching is going to start developing around this time. Now, women at home and at work is going to be a transitioning system. Now, agricultural is going to be the cottage industry, work involved women. It's a natural transition. But the development of men as prime breadwinners, women in private sphere are working cheap labor. Now, women are expected to maintain the home as well as also work in the industry. So now that women are being hired in a much more regular basis in these factories, we're seeing that this is challenging women even more. Men can go to work from 9 to 5 and come home, and their wife, who's also been working 9 to 5, is now expected to cook dinner and take care of the kids. So they're working double the duty. Not all women go into the factories. Because so many women are in the factories, we see a working class women are now expected to work. Domestic service is an option for maids, housekeepers, all those things. These are a lot more common than were previously. However, related to child labor, there's a lack of daycare facilities. So the moment you have kids is the moment essentially you kind of remove yourself until at least you can have the child taken care of, or the child can essentially be self-sustained. Now, children are also going to be found in the factories. They are easily exploited and abused. They'll be working in the factories because their hands are so small they can fit into the machines and get to the resources they need. Now, in the 1840s, the British Parliament is going to begin to pass child labor laws. They realize pretty quickly that this is a terrible thing, even though it leads to massive profits. There is eventually the final blow in child labor is going to be the moral concerns. So eventually they will be removed. There also is a need to educate the workforce. The reason why there's public education in the United States and in England is not because it's a moral duty to have everyone be self-educated, but in fact makes you a better worker. Now, we're starting to see how the industrialization is going to shape politics as well as economies. The first big challenge is going to be socialism, which is first going to be used in the context of a utopian society, and it's going to be started by Charles Fourier and Robert Owen. They are going to be in opposition of the market system or the foundations of capitalism, and they're going to attempt to create a small model communities where everything is used by the community, everything works together, everyone is on equal share. They are supposed to be inspirational for larger social units in order to make life a little more fair for everyone. It doesn't quite go as well. Now, socialism isn't really going to get its next big step until Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels is going to come around. Now, he believes that there's only two real classes in the world. There's capitalists who control the means of production, and there's the proletariat. Those are the ones who sell the labor, or the laborers. He believes that there is an exploitative nature of the capitalist system, that the capitalists are the ones reaping all the money, but the workers are themselves the ones who are using their bodies and destroying themselves in order to get it. He believes religion is an opiate of the masses or drug of the masses, and that it has no real meaning. So he's definitely challenging not only the economic side of the world, but as well as the cultural side. He believes that the proletariat are going to overthrow the capitalists and in favor of a dictatorship of the proletariat or a dictatorship of the people. So he believes the factory workers are going to overthrow the factory owners and that they will run the factories more successfully. With that being said, we're also going to have a lot of social reform and trade reform. Now, socialism is going to have a major impact on the 19th century, and its reformers, they address many issues that the socialist argument is going to bring up, including medical insurance, unemployment compensation, and retirement benefits. These are some of the great things that are going to be put into place because of trade unions and the organization of the laborers. Now, trade unions form for collective bargaining. They're trying to make sure that they can have a voice, and by getting themselves all together, threatening walkouts, picketing, and other tools of labor unions that they can strike in order to get their message to the masses. Now, as we see all of these changes that are occurring, we're going to see a lot of global effects. First of all, the global division of labor. Rural societies that produce raw materials, and then we're going to have urban societies that produce manufactured goods. Perfect example, Africa, for instance, is a rural society, and England, France, United States, Germany, Belgium are going to be our urban societies, and they're the ones going to be manufacturing the good. We're also going to have uneven economic development. Europe is going to become an economic power, while other parts of the world are going to be submissive because of the influence and the power of industrialization. Developing export dependencies of Latin America, sub-African, and Southwest Asia are also going to occur, where they're dependent on the goods and not having their own industrial revolution. Low wages, small domestic markets are going to be a huge challenge. All right, that is your industrialization. Let's talk about America. Now, in the Americas, we are going to be post-American Revolution, and let's start with the westward expansion. Now, Britain seized territories between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. Napoleon Bonaparte is going to sell Louisiana Territory in 1803 to Thomas Jefferson. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark are going to set off to explore the territory and come back. What they're going to tell the world in their journal and stories and their book they're eventually going to publish are the glories of the West, and this is going to inspire settlers to move because the land is fertile, because there's so much animals out there that they can easily survive to a degree. I mean, you're still in the frontier. But Manifest Destiny is going to start to occupy all lands between the Atlantic and the Pacific, or Manifest Destiny means they have the right to the land and they have the right to take it. Now, the conflict with the indigenous people. Now, the native people are going to resist the incursions onto ancestral lands. They believe that their people have been there for centuries, that they should have the right to the land, which, you know, is correct. However, they have a bunch of white people coming out there with covered wagons and taking up their land. Some of them are going to join alliances with one another. Some of them are not. Some of them are going to join with the British, who are still up in Canada. Some of them are not. Now, the U.S. is going to issue the U.S. Indian Removal Act in 1830 under Andrew Jackson, and this is going to drive the natives into Indian Territory, or modern-day state of Oklahoma. Now, the Seminoles are forced to march. Some escape to Florida, which is why FSU is called Seminoles. They're going to escape from this. And Cherokees are going to be forced migrated 800 miles, and this is called the Trail of Tears. Most of them, thousands of them, are going to die en route, and it is a major tragedy on bloodstain on the American reputation. But this is going to be in the 1830s. Now, with these American Indians versus America conflict, the Sioux, the Campeche, the Pawnee, and the Appalachian, that's not how you say it, but peoples are going to resist. We're going to have battles at Armstrong-Custer, at the Battle of Little Bighorn, which is going to be a forced stand. The U.S. is eventually forced to have superior firepower, including cannons and the Gatling gun, which is the first machine gun. If you haven't seen it, it's very cool. Anyway, well, it's all going to build up into a massive battle in 1890 at the Massacre of Wounded Knee. What's going to happen is that U.S. cavalry are going to murder men, women, and children, and this is the last big battle between the Native Americans and the U.S. government. At this point, the lack of trust, the hostility, a lot of the Indians or American Indians are going to head out west at this point because they can see that the U.S. will stop at nothing and have no value of life. Now, the Mexican-American War is also going to have a huge impact on American history. Mexico then included Texas, California, and New Mexico, as you've seen in the map that you did this week. Texas is influenced by many U.S. settlers, declares independence from Mexico. Texas declares independence from Mexico. However, it will be accepted into the Union in 1845 despite American protests. The cool thing about Texas is that in its little constitutional agreement with the Union, it says it can secede at any time, which Texas a couple years ago threatened to secede, which was pretty cool. They didn't, obviously. They're still part of the United States, but they did threaten to secede. Conflict is going to ensue between Mexico and Texas. Mexico does not want Texas to be gone, so they kind of push back. Eventually, Mexico is forced to secede the territory in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and we give Mexico $15 million for it. So the westward expansion, as you know from your map, is going to be pretty quick and throughout. Now, sectional conflict. There are major issues with adding new territory. The biggest issue, should slavery be allowed? Tobacco cultivation is on decline, but cotton industry spurs new demand for slaves. Eli Whitney saves slavery. Now, the U.S. slave population rises from 500,000 in 1770 to 2 million in 1820. This is directly caused by Eli Whitney and his cotton gin. Now, the Missouri Compromise in 1820 attempts to strike a balance between slave and free states. The reason why is because our politicians don't want too many slave states in the Union, which which makes the non-slave states less powerful. So the Missouri Compromise says if one state comes in as a slave state, another one at the same time has to come in as a free state in order to keep the balance. And it works for a while, works for about 45 years, and then it completely erupts. Now, the Civil War is going to be fought, of course, trying to solve the problem of slavery. Abraham, some of the big causes of the Civil War, not only dispute of slavery, is Abraham Lincoln is elected into president. The South sees this as a direct attack and assault on their way of life because he is such an anti-slavery person. Now, the issue of slavery highlighted the principle of states' rights, coped with federal authority and this is why Confederates were so passionate about states' rights, because they saw slavery as a states issue rather than a federal authority. Now, as soon as Abraham Lincoln is set to take office, 11 southern states withdraw from the Union, starting with South Carolina, I believe. I'm pretty sure. If it's not South Carolina, it's going to be Virginia. Now, the southern economy is going to be dependent on cotton as a cash crop, and those are were necessary of the slaves to be kept in the South in order for that economy to continue. Now, the northern economy, however, is based on industrialization and wage earners. So the South is based on free laborers, which makes it so productive for the plantation owners, while the North is all based on wage earners. As one of the tools Abraham Lincoln is going to use, the Emancipation Proclamation is going to be one of his big tools. As soon as the war starts in 1861, we're going to see that Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation about 2 years in after a major victory, specifically after the Battle of Gettysburg. He's going to write the Emancipation Proclamation, which says that any slave is now a free man. This turns the tide for the North. Battle of Gettysburg is the cornerstone of the turn of the Civil War in the North's favor. However, the Emancipation Proclamation is going to allow the North to continue on and fight back against the South, because all the slaves that are leaving the South are going to fight for the Confederacy in the North. The North wins after about 4 years of bloody conflict. It is obviously the most deadliest conflict in American history because it's Americans on both sides. I'm pretty sure World War II does not come up quite as high, but it's pretty damn high. Now, Canada's independence without war is going to be something that kind of changes everything. Now, regional divisions in Canadian society were very, very clear, but independence achieved without war was one of their crowning accomplishments. There's a British Canada and there's a French Canada. Now, both of them wanted to be separate. Now, the reason why is because the French territory seceded after the 7 Years' War. Concessions were made to the large French population, recognition of Roman Catholic Church, French laws, all these types of things. However, after 1871, the British population in Ontario joined by loyalists fleeing the U.S. War of Independence. They're going to strike up a bargain with England saying, hey, we want to leave, but we really don't want to fight you. And at this point, England's tired of fighting over in this territory, so they say, hey, you can have your independence. We're still going to protect you. You're technically one of ours. We're just going to leave you alone. And that's how it stands today. Now, the War of 1812 is going to be a huge thing. It's the War of Second Independence. The U.S. declares war on British over the encroachments during the Napoleonic War. Now, the British forces in Canada repel U.S. attacks, so the United States attack Canada. The Canadians and the British are going to fight back, and they're going to hold their borders. There's going to be a lot of social tensions between the French and the English populations. Remember, the French are more sympathetic to the Americans, while the British are absolutely not sympathetic to the Americans, so we're going to have a lot of tensions there. The British wish to avoid a repeat of the U.S. War of Independence, and they're going to gradually extend home rule or allow the Canadians to rule without being in their business. One of the other big things that's going to happen is the British North America Act. Quebec, which is Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, are going to be provinces in the Dominion of Canada, the provincial governments and federal governments of the Governor General as British representatives. So they're going to be British citizens, but they're not going to be too governed. The first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, is going to purchase territory and build trans-Canadian railroads. Now, Latin America, there's a lot going on down here as well. Now, the Creole elites produced republics with constitutions, but less experience with self-rule. So because they don't have too much experience with self-rule, they're going to fail pretty quickly. Spanish, Portuguese are more autocratic than the British, and they had no background of how to rule themselves. Now, there are significant political differences in the division of Creoles, specifically with indigenous people, especially in Argentina and Chile. People don't trust each other and the lower social status. The British don't have that structured of a social system, as we know, because when we first started talking about colonies and all that stuff, we talked about the systems of social structure. However, because of that, the United States kind of moved on very quickly, but here in Latin America, they did not. Now, there's regional military leaders who come into power, but they're going to be using war in order to maintain their power, and that's not effective over long term. Now, Mexico is going to attempt to reform itself after the U.S.-Mexican War. The reform government of Benito Juarez comes into power. He attempts to limit the power of the military and the church. He's going to be successful for a little bit, but he's eventually going to be forced out of Mexico. He's going to suspend loan payments to foreign powers. European monarchies are not thrilled, and so they're going to get involved in order to collect their investments. The French and the Mexican are going to clash most significantly in 1862. Now, because of all these problems, it's going to start the Mexican Revolution. Now, the Mexican Revolution is when we're going to see the middle-class Mexican peasants and workers join to overthrow Porfirio Diaz. They're going to try to overthrow the new dictator. Revolutionary leaders are going to lead masses of landless peasants who are tired of this new system. They are going to be very popular, but they can't take major cities. They're not very organized militarily, so they're not going to be as successful. Eventually, they are going to win out, and the Mexican Constitution of 1917 is going to address many of the concerns of land redistribution. So, the Mexican Revolution is eventually going to be successful, even though it's not quite that organized. Now, as we continue to go, we're going to see that Americans are going to become more economic have a lot more economic gains to be had. There's going to be the California gold rush in 1845. We're also going to see a Canadian gold rush, and all of these are going to attract migrants and immigrants to these territories. Others migrate to factories, railroads, construction sites, plantations, as well as support services. So we have a mass migration of people all throughout North America. Especially Italians are going to migrate and return several times. As the economic expansion is going to occur, the British capital spurs a vast expansion of U.S. industry. So we're going to have a massive expansion of the rail system. We're going to have a ton of scientific breakthroughs, as well as dividing the U.S. into 4 time zones, which is a huge deal, science deal, as well as an expansion of the economy with the electrification and trade unions. So we're going to see a lot of big positive things. Now, Canadian prosperity is going to start because of British investments in Canada, with help with the railway and help with other major infrastructure deals. Now, the policy of economic development is the national policy. It's going to attract migrants to promote startup industries, build up transportation, as well as other industrializational goals. The U.S. is also going to invest in Canada, owning 30% of Canadian industry by 1918. Now, Latin America is going to have all these revolutions and all these things, but the problem is they're still going to be dependent on American goods. Now, because they don't have that much industrialization, they're going to be dependent on foreign investment. They're going to need European powers to bring in money, and they are going to have to pay back them. Now, a small size of Latin American markets is going to cause a problem. There's going to be an interest in exploiting raw materials, specifically Argentinian beef. A lot of countries are going in and trying to get this Argentinian beef, but they're not paying full market prices, which is going to hurt the local Argentinian economy. Limited industrialization initiatives are foiled by government corruption. So when people are trying to industrialize these Latin American countries, the government's going to get in the way and stop it from occurring, which means that there's going to be very little industrialization by locals, but other countries are going to come in and start industrialization, and all of those profits are going back to the European location rather than local. There is going to be a significant export-driven rise in economy. A lot of these goods from Latin America are in high demand over in Europe, so we're going to see a lot of that, but they're not getting fair market value. Now, societies in the United States, the U.S. population is going to be the most culturally diverse in the hemisphere. There's so many people in the United States from all different backgrounds and origins. It's going to be the most multicultural, or the melting pot. Now, the indigenous people are subject to formal policy of forced assimilation. You're going to see that the Native Americans are no longer allowed to be self-sufficient. They have to learn English, they have to go to school, they have to wear traditional clothing. They're going to destroy buffalo-based economies, which means people are not allowed to migrate and follow the buffalo anymore. They're now going to be much more regulated. The Dawes Civility Act shifts policies away from collective tribal reservations. So no longer are reservations protected by groups. Now it's going to be created by the government. They're going to be assigned territory. And I think you and I both agree the answer to this question. Is it going to be the best land or the worst land? We all know it's going to be the worst land. Native children are taken away from families, and they're enrolled in white-controlled boarding schools. We're taking these kids away from their cultural identity and forcing them into a brand new world. There's a really interesting picture in your textbook about this. Now, the freed slaves, because of the Emancipation Proclamation signed by Abraham Lincoln, slavery is going to end, but we're going to have a lot of issues with social discrimination. Now, the northern armies are going to occupy southern states, and they're going to force this social problem called Reconstruction, where they're trying to improve the social position of these blacks. However, it is essentially forced by gunpoint for it to occur, which I think we can all agree that it's not probably going to work. Now, because the Southerners are being forced to treat these black former slaves as equals, there's going to be a very violent backlash to it. Once Reconstruction kind of gets going longer and longer, and the military is not as involved, these freed black slaves are now going to be work as sharecroppers. They're going to get paid a very small salary, very small wage. They're going to have no land of their own. They're essentially renters or slaves who get a very small wage. There's going to be a lot of violence and a lot of intimidation in order to try to keep the freed slaves out of getting into any positions of power. Now, back in Canada, we're going to see a lot of cultural contrast. Now, the British and the French each view themselves as principal founding peoples of Canada. We're going to see that there's quite the rivalry between the two. The principal social tensions between them, they both have small slave populations before abolished in 1833, of course. Freed slaves, runaway, and Chinese migrants are going to be making up the Canadian population. Louis Riel is going to lead the natives and the mixed race in a rebellion in Western Canada. He will eventually be defeated and attempts another rebellion in 1885, which will later be executed for. Now, the diversity in Latin America is going to be a very complex social structure, which is based on racial background. Europeans, natives, African slaves, and a combination thereof are going to be the certain limitations depending on what your cultural background is, depends on your social structure. There's going to be a lot more migration in the 19th century from Asia into these territories because they're going to be the higher ranking. We're also going to see that some conflicts between the cosmopolitan cities and the rural areas are going to exist. Obviously, the governments are going to favor the cosmopolitan cities rather than the rural areas because that's where more of the money is, as well as a symbol of rural culture. The gaucho cowboy is going to exist, which is going to be a throwback or a notion of better times. Now, here you go. That is week 20. It's a lot of information coming at you quick, but it's a very interesting week, and this will change the world. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great week. Have a great night. See